Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's body image and mindset coach. Today, I'm joined with the lovely Sally O'Neill. And for those who don't know Sally, she's a nutritionist that helps people, mainly women, to better understand flexible dieting and nutritional science. Now, I've literally just been chatting with Sally for like the past 20 minutes. And I think today's podcast is going to be absolutely mind-blowing, because if you're someone who's into your health and fitness and you're wanting to learn a little bit more around nutrition, Sally and I are really going to break down what flexible eating and dieting looks like, but through the science lens, because I know there's so much misinformation there and it can get so confusing and overwhelming for all of us to achieve our goals. So what a better way to have a chat with Sally about all of this. Sally, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, what an intro. Thank you so much, Siggy. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm super excited to have you. Now, for those who don't know you, Sally, would you mind starting off with what got you to become a nutritionist?
Oh, it's kind of a long story, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. But very long story short, never had any interest in food, used to have a terrible diet, in fact. Didn't learn to cook until I was maybe 25, which is shocking. Couldn't boil an egg, couldn't cook a piece of chicken. I'm now 36, to put things into context. I have improved somewhat since then. To give you a backstory, I came over, obviously I've got this horrible accent from the UK, Yorkshire accent. Came over when I think I was maybe 23 to Australia. And as I was saying, couldn't learn to cook. Mum sent me a load of recipes so I didn't die while I was backpacking, basically. So, because I was living off microwave meals. And then the recipes she sent me were actually really not very healthy. And I didn't know that I'd been eating them all those years when I was living with my mum. So I took those recipes and made them a little bit healthier. So she used to put jam in bolognese. Don't know if anybody's ever had that. Yeah, apparently it like brings out the sweetness of the meat. Something super weird.
No, it does not.
Yeah, that's UK for you. Any way they can add in the calories, they will. So I took her recipes and basically simplified them. I ended up losing, I think, 9 kilos in about 8 months, which honestly, like, I didn't have tons to lose. And I was really shocked because I wasn't even trying to be on a diet. So moving from that chapter, lost some weight, started recording these healthier recipes that my mum had, like from the ones my mum had sent, onto a website for my mum, because I kept losing all these recipes on emails. I thought it was for my mum, didn't actually realise, because my partner then had set it up, that it was actually a public blog. The blog took off. At the same time, I think it was back in 2012, Instagram had kind of started kicking off, and I started sharing photos of my food on there. So that then got noticed by a publisher. A publisher contacted me and was like, hey, come in for a meeting. And really long story short, I ended up with 2 cookbooks. I learned to be a food photographer in the process off YouTube. And now that's part of my full-time job, is doing food photography and styling and writing cookbooks for people, like ghostwriting and doing recipes and things, which is really fun. But then got me so far in the industry. And then when I was publishing things, I was like, hang on a sec, I have no qualification in nutrition. This is questionable. I don't want to be another Pete Evans where I get into trouble for writing a book. I don't know if anyone heard about that, the baby book saga. But that all kind of came out at the same time that my first book got published. And I was like, you know what? This is questionable. I just need to cover my ass. And I also want to be fair to my audience, right? So I decided to do a second degree. My first one was in business when I was younger, and studied clinical nutrition for 6 years part-time whilst I was doing my photography stuff. So now, clinical nutritionist, food photographer, stylist.
Boom.
Bit of a random story.
So, but you know what? It's random, but it all connects together, because funnily enough, I studied photography as well, but I'm not a photographer anymore, but I use my photography skills for my video editing, for my social media. So it comes in really handy with what we're doing right now. And especially with your recipes and the blogs and everything, it's such another way of looking at the creative side of things.
I envy you because I definitely can't do video. I'm all about stills, and I can't shoot people either. When people say, "Oh, can you just do a photo of the chef?" and I'm like, "No, actually, I can't." No, I can't. I'm terrible at that. But food stays still for a really long time, which is why I like it, and I can play with it and make it look pretty and do all the tricks of the trade. So it's the easiest type of photography, I might add. But yeah, it works for me, and so now I get to play with food, be creative, write about it. And then as of 2 years ago, started my own clinic. So now I do Zoom calls. And then on top of that, because I was finding that in nutrition clinic, I was kind of saying the same thing to lots and lots of ladies who were just really confused about diet and information that they'd received online or what they Googled or what the GP had said. And I was just like, you know what, there's got to be a better way to help more people than me doing it one-on-one, even though that's very valuable. And so I started an app called Status 80/20, which we can talk about in a sec, but basically the philosophy behind it is flexible eating. And so 80% of food should come from whole foods and 20% or thereabouts can come from treats. And I'm a huge proponent of it because not only has it helped me, but there is a lot of science behind it as well, which is awesome. Because I am a woman of science and I love reading all the evidence and the abstracts and all that fun stuff. So that's now how I've scaled the knowledge and the education and things that I've been able to pass on to people. So it's available for much cheaper than the cost of an initial consult. And it runs for 12-week blocks. And in that, there's also somebody who's a strength programmer who comes in and does all the strength training for women for us as well. So it's nutrition, education, macros, and strength training all in one platform, which is really cool.
I love that. And you know what, I've noticed that sometimes there's like this gap in between education and the training and the nutrition side of things. And I actually had a conversation with one of my my mentees this morning about this because they're looking at expanding their way of delivering services to their clients, and they notice they love doing the training and nutrition, but there's this gap of the education. And I love the fact that you've literally been able to combine all of it together.
Yeah, thank you. I always say to clients who I have one-on-one, it's like, I want you to get off my books as soon as possible. And I mean that in the nicest way. But like all nutritionists work differently, all dietitians work differently. But my ethos was never to just get somebody on a call, give them a meal plan, give them a plaster for their problem, right? And send them away. And then financially it would make sense, right? Because they have to keep coming back to me every 2 weeks and say, give me a new meal plan, because they don't understand the theory or the reason or the structure behind the way that I've programmed that meal plan. Whereas if I can give them that information, they then have the tools themselves to build their own meal plans, which makes life a lot easier. And they can keep that knowledge for the rest of their lives, right? And they can hand it out to their mates and whatnot. So that's really my goal, is that like there's honestly enough women in the world that are confused as it is. I don't need repeat business in that sense of like people keep coming back for me just confused and me not leaving them any better off. So I always say, come to me, I'll give you the education that I received through my degree in easy digestible format, and we'll get you off the roller coaster of dieting and we'll send you on your way a much more knowledgeable human around nutrition.
Yeah, I admire that so much. What would you say is the main misconception or the main, I guess, problem that the clients are coming to you around dieting or around eating?
I would say that there's a really common theme of women trying everything and then getting frustrated after 2 weeks and then throwing in the towel, right? Which I fully understand, and I've done it as well. Truly have been there. Intermittent fasting is the one that most women come to me with, which kind of kills me because the science for women with intermittent fasting is not there. It's a lot easier in men. A lot of the studies have been done in men, and I will say women are underrepresented in science in studies because we have such fluctuating hormones that they can't baseline enough women that are going through the exact phase at the same time to be able to do the testing on them. And we become a lot more expensive because of that. And they also have to start with a massive pool of women, right, to be able to get the right pool of women going through the right phase at the right time, to be able to test everything and then account for hormonal fluctuations, right? So we're really underrepresented in science. In intermittent fasting, a lot of the science therefore was done in men. So yes, it's a way of creating a caloric deficit that some people love. For women, it can be really detrimental on cortisol, because we know actually that food stunts the cortisol response, which is part of the reason why we love to emotionally eat, because when we get stressed, it helps with that stress, right? It helps stunt the cortisol elevating. But when cortisol's on the increase first thing in the morning, when you eat, it slows that cortisol jump. Yeah. But what we actually do in intermittent fasting is scull a coffee and then wait another 3 hours until we actually eat, and cortisol is off the charts by lunchtime, which we know when it's elevated for like chronic periods of time, for long periods of time, it then affects our fat storage mechanisms. Yeah. So then we start to see more fat storage, and actually it then has a detrimental effect. So it has the opposite effect of what we're trying to achieve, right? So what I say to people is, look, if it works for you, perfect. If you find in 3 or 4 months that you're starting to store fat in different places, come and have another conversation with me. If you're finding that you can't adhere to it long term, come and have another conversation with me. Because my approach is like, look, everybody is different. Everybody has different lifestyles. Everybody has different schedules. It's not okay for me to say to someone, you have to eat 6 meals a day because that's what the science says is beneficial for muscle building. Like, it's just ridiculous. It might be that you've got a busy mum of 3 kids, single mum, right? She's not going to have time to eat 6 meals a day. It's insane. So it's working with the person, what works for them. But realistically, there's no kind of cut and dry system that is for everyone. What I have found that consistently works is just approaching things with kindness. And that for me is that 80-20 balance. So like, you know what? I just want to get it right 80% of the time. And that includes the way that I approach my food and the type of food that I'm eating. So like, for example, if you're on a deficit, get it right 80% of the time. Yeah. If you're trying to cut calories, get it right 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, don't overthink it, don't kick yourself. And then same with whole foods versus treats. So that's kind of that's the antidote for the situation I think that we all find ourselves in at the moment. And it seems to have, and there's science to say that it works, but it seems to have a great impact on the clients that I've dealt with as well.
And I think it also takes the pressure off having to constantly eat healthy in quotations, because it gives them the flexibility of actually enjoying themselves, but also knowing that they're getting the nutrients, the micronutrients, and the vitamins and minerals from the actual foods that they need to eat. But you also made a really good point around the intermittent fasting. And I feel this is a conversation that needs to be explored a little bit more, because there's this idea in women's heads that intermittent fasting is going to get them to lose weight quicker. And we know, as you mentioned, sometimes it can just increase too much stress hormones that actually backfires on them, and they don't get those results.
Absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you come to a caloric deficit. As long as you're in one, you will lose weight over a period of time. And the way that we get it wrong is we either don't work out what our daily energy expenditure is, and therefore we think we're in a deficit, but we're not, right? And then there's the approach that we try to get there, like, so how to get into a deficit. And if it's intermittent fasting, that's one route, but it might be cutting out carbs. That's another route, not necessary, but people do that. It might be cutting out fat. It might be cutting out fruit. Whatever the approach is to get to a deficit, it needs to be sustainable long term. And I think the problem we see is that people think it's easier to follow a strict regimen, right? Of like, just tell me what to do and I will do it. I won't eat carbs for 6 weeks, right? But then they go to a party and somebody's got a bowl full of chips and it's like, throwing in the towel, sod it, I'm having a day off, and like potatoes, chips, everything goes down the hatch. And then they feel like they've failed. And then there's this negative conversation with self of like, I effed up, what am I going to do on Monday? What are the scales going to say? And it creates this really poor relationship with food, which is why I love that balance, right? Of you can be in a deficit, or you can be at maintenance, or you can actually put on weight if that is your goal, with the approach of 80-20. So it never changes. It's just an approach to eating that gives you flexibility. And sometimes I'll get clients who are like, I just want to be 100% all in because that's how I do it the best, right? I just want you to tell me to eat clean all of the time. And I honestly will sit people down and be like, we're not doing that. That's not how it works. Because I always use the analogy of the housing market, right? Which we were just speaking about before we came on this podcast. Rental situation right now is horrendous, guys. But we were just saying that, like, with the housing market, right? Say you limit supply, the value and demand shoots up. Yeah. So in the sense of food, if you limit chocolate, you put so much value on it because it's never there. If you allow supply, the value and the demand from your side of things goes down. So say I gave you 10 bars of chocolate in your cupboard, you might get through 2 and feel a bit sick, right? And then you're like, I'm not that bothered. I really just want some veggies for my next meal. Like, I'm not going to keep eating the rest of the chocolate. That's the supply and demand thing is really what we're playing with from a psychological basis with the 80-20 rule. So you allow a little bit, you actually don't binge on it. You'll have like 2 biscuits and then you're like, I'm actually done with this now because I know tomorrow I can have 2 more biscuits, and the day after I can have 2 more biscuits. Like, it really limits the need for volume eating of treat foods. And so you never feel like you've fallen off track. You never get the guilty conversation, and you can just get back into balance and have a good relationship with food, right? Which is really what we would all love, I think.
It's such a good analogy as well, because it brings me back memories when I was younger, and I was that whole like all or nothing with food. And I used to cut ice cream out because that was, ice cream's no good. Like, you can't have that. And I remember literally every weekend when a Friday night would reach, I would go to the store, buy myself a tub of ice cream, and I would binge on it. Like, on a weekend basis. And this was going for years, like a really, really long time. And I thought I was doing good because, I was eating clean Monday to Friday, but then the weekend came and you just binge. And it was because I was going too hard too soon, and I wasn't giving myself the permission to actually have that food in flexibility. And funnily enough, celebrating my birthday yesterday,
Yay, happy birthday.
I have a few cakes in my fridge, and they're still there. And if that was me, 7 years ago, I would have demolished it that evening in a heartbeat. So it just shows you like balance is possible, but also with applying it properly to your lifestyle without having to diminish these foods.
Absolutely. And I say to people as well, like, I actually want you to have a little bit every day, even if you don't feel like it sometimes. It's like, just try and include it, and account for it in your, obviously, your total calories, whichever direction you're headed in, whether you're in a surplus or maintenance or a deficit, because that supply and knowing that it's there and whatever will really limit value. So if you're one of those people who are like, I'm going to be great all week, and then you smash it on a weekend, right? It's easier to have, say, 2 tablespoons of ice cream throughout the week after dinner every night, even if you don't fancy it that much. You're like, yeah, I could do something sweet, but I could also like just go without, which is what all the ladies want to do. Have a little bit and stop thinking about it, right? And then come the weekend, there's probably something else that you actually fancy that's just like, I've had ice cream all week, I'm done. I've had half a tub, right? Because I had a couple of tablespoons every night. And now I fancy a glass of wine with my girlfriend. That's so fine. 10 glasses of wine, not so great. So same thing with alcohol, right? I see that a lot in clinic, where ladies are like, oh, I'm so good with my diet, I'm amazing, I do 20,000 steps a day, I train 5 days a week, can't lose this weight. I'm like, great, how much are you drinking? Well, I only have half a litre of water a day, and I have 2 glasses of wine every night. Like, cool, okay, so where's the balance? So it's just about like, really analyzing where we can bring more balance back in, have a good relationship with it, and stop the binge and restrict cycle on every aspect of food, right? So once your mindset's good around food, everything flows. You stop thinking about it so much, because I think that's part of the issue, right? When we go on a diet, it's like, oh, I can't have this, I can't have that, I can't eat out with my friends, I can't. It's this constant coming from a place of lack and restriction, whereas I want to flip that in the opposite direction of like, I can have stuff when I want it, actually. So now I actually don't think about it that much, which is cool. Yeah. And then diet kind of becomes one of the last things on your mind. It's just fuel, and it's enjoyable when you want it to be, and the rest of the time it just keeps you going, keeps you awake, energized.
I want to explore more about that, because I know a lot of our listeners do go through the stages of dieting and do go through the stages of the lacking mindset around nutrition. And you made such a good point about there that certain women will go onto these diets, or they're wanting to lose weight and they don't lose weight because they lack the hydration, but then they drink in the evenings. Now, there's no problem in drinking in the evening. However, if you have a goal of wanting to lose weight, those excess empty calories are going to hold you back. And I would love your input around this, because I've come across a lot of women who are like, I just need a glass of wine at the end of the day to wind down. And we know it's not really helping them to wind down.
Right. Well, it's not just the wine, right? It's the cookies, or it's the bag of chips on the couch, right? Or whatever the soothing mechanism is. And I think that's another thing that we need to look at, right, as women, is what mechanisms do we actually have in place for self-soothing? Because a lot of the time when I'll say to clients, I have this very extensive intake form, right? It's like, what strategies do you have for self-soothing? How much time do you spend in nature? How much quality social connection do you have in a week, by the hour? And a lot of the time, that stuff is missing. And so the self-soothing and the need to deal with stress comes through food and alcohol. Yeah. And so if we can get the other thing in balance, we can pull down the requirement to self-soothe with food and alcohol, right? So it's like, what are the alternatives? And have a toolkit for yourself. So this isn't always going to work, right? 80% of the time we want this to work. 20% of the time, have the alcohol and the food, fine. What we want to do is just shift the balance though, right? So when you want to self-soothe, what do you have as a toolkit in the moment to turn to? So one of my favorite things that a tool that I use for clients, and it's a really well-known tool in like psychological circles, is something called, it's an acronym that I ask clients to say to themselves, and it's called HALT the BS. So like, halt the bullshit, excuse my French. But what it stands for, what the acronym stands for, is when you go to eat and you think it may be self-soothing, you can say to yourself, hang on, let's just halt the BS, right? And it stands for, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed? HALTBS, yeah? And what we're trying to do by saying that to ourselves, sometimes I get girls to write it up on the fridge, right? Because the first thing they go to is the fridge when the stress happens, yeah? And it's like, what it does is it interjects a thought process that is an automated response to a stressful learnt. It's like a learnt response to stress. So your mind, we always say this, what wires together, fires together. What fires together, wires together. And so on repeat, we've done that, right? With stress, we eat, with stress, we eat, with stress, we eat. And so over time, we've got that as a learned behavior. And so that will repeat until we interject that automated process with a new thought process or a new pattern of behavior. And until, like, we can't really do that if it's automated, right? Because it's just like, I don't even think about me reaching for the chocolate. I just do it. And then I'm a bar in and I'm like, oh, I've done it again, right? So the HALT the BS acronym, or the thought process, interjects into an automated system that your body set up for yourself as a protection mechanism. And then we go, actually, I'm just bringing awareness to a moment that's normally on autopilot. So then I can say, actually, am I hungry right now? And if I'm hungry, is the thing that I'm reaching for going to serve me well? Like, is it actually what I want? Or am I angry? If I'm angry, is eating a good response? Is it the most effective response for the outcome that I want? Am I lonely, right? In which case, Could I be eating with a mate right now? Or do I even need the food? Could I just go and call a friend? Am I tired? In which case, maybe it's actually time for a nap and not time to have a glass of Diet Coke or whatever you're going to have, right? Or chocolate. Am I bored? In which case, is there something else I could be doing to entertain myself? Like, could I be meditating? Could I be having a bath? Could I be doing something else that's really lovely and soothing, like going for a walk? Or am I stressed? And in which case, what are my toolbox? What does my toolbox hold for stressful moments? Yeah. So is it reading? Is it going for a walk? Is it talking to a mate? Is it going to the gym? Yeah. So what I say to people is, what I want a bit of homework, and hopefully your listeners can do this as well, is write down that acronym, right? And then come up with a list of tools under lonely, bored, tired, stressed, that kind of stuff. Go under there and write all the different things that they would get benefit from in that moment and stick it on the fridge. Because if it's lonely and the answer is, I'm going to phone my dad because he always picks me up, right? He's a legend. He's always upbeat. So when I'm lonely and I go to have a bar of chocolate, in actual fact, now I go to the fridge and I'm prompted to call my dad instead. Then give it half an hour and be like, you know what? I still want the bloody bar of chocolate. Then do it. That's fine. But at least you've changed the patterning, the brain process of automation, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So I really love that technique for self-soothing, whether it's alcohol, as you mentioned, or whether it's food, because it is a stress reliever. People do turn to alcohol to wind down, but there's actually so many other beautiful, supportive ways that align with your long-term goals. Alcohol is a thing into itself as well, Siggy. We know that because it's a toxin, right? So the body tries to process it first and puts all metabolism of food and whatnot on the back burner to get it out your system. So even though it's empty calories, it also reduces our body's ability, or slows down our body's ability to metabolize the food that we've had as well. So alcohol's just a bit of a different thing. But as you were saying, it's a great soother. It's just not necessarily aligned with our long-term goals. So what can we put in place instead?
I love that acronym. It's so true though. And I think, well, I know a lot of our listeners are going to start putting a lot of this into consideration and making them realize that, hey, maybe the alcohol is not actually helping you or benefiting you.
Yeah. And put parameters on it, like say, Monday's going to be a killer. Every time you go on a Monday, it's horrible, right? Do your glass of wine for the week then. Cool, that's your night. And then maybe on a Tuesday, you book yourself in for a sauna, or that's the night you go for a walk and talk with your girlfriend, or the time you call your dad or whatever. If you feel better having a bit of a schedule, it's like put that in diary. A lot of us are really busy and we all live by our calendars. So if it's something you need to schedule in, then do that too. It's really working out for you individually what's the best way to approach this thing, right? And then also implementing strategies not when you're stressed but when you're calm. So just like you shouldn't meditate only when you're stressed, because you're going to find it horrible and then you're going to want to throw in the towel because it's not going to work. You're going to be like, oh my god, my brain's firing. If you learn to do it in a calm state, then it makes it so much easier when you've got anxiety to fall into a calm state, because it's something you have done in the past when you've been calm. So I always say to people, like, practice it all of the time. Don't just do it when you're stressed, because that's not really the purpose behind it.
And it's a great example around dieting as well, because we know that too often people leave dieting to the last minute, or they notice they've put on all this weight and they're wanting to lose weight way too quickly. And that's when they go and do these abrupt diets or these ways of living that obviously doesn't serve them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much danger in marketing, right, of diets, and it annoys me so much, which is why I'm so passionate about what I do, because there's no science in majority of the stuff that's put out there, honestly, about dieting. It's really simple. It's so overcomplicated in the media, and the people who are putting it out are people who aren't scientists, who aren't dietitians, who aren't nutritionists, right? It's people who are trying to sell you products, who are trying to sell you cookbooks, who are trying to sell you supplements and fat burners and whatnot. And those are the people who don't actually have the qualifications or the knowledge about the science. And so it's really hard as women to distinguish, like, who's telling me the truth? Is this Sally chick that I'm listening to right now talking rubbish, or is she talking the truth? And it's so important to check your sources, right? I always say that, but also to try on what's going to work for you and what sounds fair and what sounds like something you can stick to long term. And I know I say that all the time. I've said it about 5 times already. But what matters in weight loss is adherence. So if you're on a weight loss journey and you look at a plan that's like 6 weeks, let's drop the fat, blah, 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 F45, whatever it is, right? You can only eat turkey and lettuce. Can you honestly see yourself doing that for the rest of your days? Because if you are going to do that for the rest of your days, I take my hat off to you, because that sounds like a miserable existence. Like, I want to have birthday cake. I'm coming round for some of yours. But I also don't want to be in a position where I go out to a party and I'm faced with something that's not my normal and I panic and then I overeat everything. You know, I just want to like enjoy things in moderation. So for me, whatever you embark on, it needs to be able to be done long term. And if it can't be, then I would question who's marketed it to you, what their end game is, like why are they telling you that stuff? Are they making money off you? And realistically, what happens at the end of that period that they're selling it to you for? So are you going to walk away more educated? Are you going to be able to sustain it? Or are you going to go back to your old ways and then put the weight back on, which is honestly worse sometimes than just staying at the weight that you are?
Yeah. And you know what? It's very, very common. And it happens so many times that those who do end up eating, you know, the lettuce and dried chicken and whatever it is that they choose to, they end up going back to their old habits and they end up putting the weight on, or even more, because A, they weren't educated, and B, they were doing unsustainable things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it makes me so sad, because I'm like, God, food's there to enjoy, you know, and like it's a really social construct as well. Like everybody goes out and has breakfast in Australia, you know, like a beautiful brunch or a lunch with your girlfriends, and like it's so disheartening as a woman to not be able to do those things, because like your girlfriends invite you out, you're like, oh, I'm going to eat beforehand, I'll just come and have a soda, because you know you want to be able to celebrate with your friends, and food is a thing that brings people together and it's beautiful. So allowing those moments and finding something that works for you that fits that in. If it doesn't fit it in, I would say it's a red flag. Like that for me is just like, I can't stick to this sustainably. If I can't go out and have eggs on toast with my girlfriends on a weekend, or in a acai bowl or something, or a glass of wine, I'm not going to be able to do this long term. So it's not something I want to follow.
You made such a good point, and I really want to open this conversation around dieting, because too often there are coaches out there who say that you do need to go all in or nothing, because they are following a certain diet and you have a certain goal, and you should be giving up alcohol and ice cream or whatever foods it is that, you know, you shouldn't be eating during a diet. And it causes a lot of trouble, not only to, you know, our social life, but also mental life, because then it puts us with, like, as you mentioned, like these red flags around certain foods or certain behaviors. Like, what is your belief around that? I know mine already, and I have a feeling it's going to be very similar to mine.
Look, I would say, like, I fully respect coaches. As I was saying, I think I would just be very careful of the source, and in terms of like, I want to know their knowledge. I would say to them, can you educate me on why this is the best approach for my health long term? That would be the question I would pose, and I would just let them respond and see what happens. Because if their best interest is only in the very short term for that 6 weeks, then you have to be informed about that, right? And then if they say, look, this is just to get you thin in 6 weeks, then you want to ask the question, what do I do after that then? If that's the case, like say I stick to it for 6 weeks and I, you know, lose 10 kilos, cool. What then do I do after that? Like, how are you going to get me out of this restriction phase? Because that is not a lifestyle that I want to lead for the rest of my life. That's not realistically how I'm going to be able to eat till the end of my days. So what's the plan after that? So those are the two things I would ask. And if you don't get a satisfactory answer, then I would maybe look for a different coach. That would be my thing, I think. What about you?
I totally agree. I love questioning everyone and everything. And I never did did question enough when I was younger, and hence I fell into a really toxic way of eating, especially during the days that I competed. I still have nightmares because of that, but you know what? You live and you learn. So I love the fact that you mentioned, hey, you need to ask, like, what are the intentions behind this? Because again, too often we see a lot of women, vulnerable women, who don't know any better, or who are scared to actually ask these questions, and they end up falling into these really bad patterns of eating. So I love the fact that you said, hey, like, question your coach or whoever is educating you on, like, why is this the best option for them? And if it doesn't sound right to you, then you have every right to move away and go somewhere else.
Absolutely. And same for me, you know, I say that to clients all the time. Like, if we don't find a way that works for you, and you don't like, you know, my reasoning behind what I'm asking you to do. And, you know, there has been people who've come to me and said, I just want that 6-week plan, and I've just got to get thin for my wedding or for whatever. And I get it. And I say to them, look, my goal is to make you the healthiest person, to feel good, to have a good relationship with food, and then lose the weight, right? Cool. I'm not going to put you on a crash diet. So if that's what you're after, I'm not your coach. I'm not your nutritionist, because it doesn't fit with my ethos. Yeah. And I think for people who are looking for that, then I'm not for them. And that's so fine. You know, that is so fine. But I'm also not going to jeopardize my values and the science that I know, because I know from science that if somebody loses weight really quickly, you can't possibly only lose it from fat.
Yeah.
You have to lose it from muscle. You'll know that doing body competitions and things. Yeah. So when you cut, the rate at which you cut matters. So if you slowly lose body fat or slowly lose weight, more of that will be coming from fat than it will from muscle. And if you do it quickly, you're more likely to lose muscle mass. And we know that muscle mass is so important. Number one, as women, right, we really need good muscle going into later years, because we're much more prone to falls, hip fractures, breakages, all that kind of stuff. So having good muscle tone is going to look after us long term. Like, I don't want somebody else wiping my bum when I'm 75, you know? So like, I want a really strong, healthy body into older years. And I can only do that if I look after body now and I don't do crazy crash diets. Yeah. Because I've got to grow the muscle and I've got to keep it there. And then the other thing is your basal metabolic rate, which you'll know more about, Sig, but like in terms of how much energy you burn at rest is determined mostly by your genetics, also by your age, your height, your weight, etc. Part of that equation is how much muscle mass you've got. So if you've got loads of muscle, you're naturally burning so much more energy than someone at the same weight as you that's made up more of fat. Yeah. So if you lose muscle, you're going to lose the ability to burn energy at rest. So we want to try as much as possible to maintain as much muscle mass, and we can only do that if we go long and slow with weight loss. So I would say 0.5 kilo to 1 kilo a week is more than enough for a woman to be losing weight, which sounds frustratingly slow, right? If you lose 1 kilo a month, you'll be like, oh, this is far too slow. If I do F45, I can smash 6 kilos in 6 weeks or whatever, yeah? But sure, you're going to lose muscle mass then, and that's the trade-off. So I always I want people to be aware of that, of like, what are you trading for the weight loss? Because for me, it doesn't make sense. Like, stick with me an extra month and you'll maintain much more muscle come the end of it if you can be patient. We're not patient beings. So that's tricky. It's a tricky ask, and I get that. But that's my goal, and that's my reasoning why I push people to go a bit slower with it.
I admire that so much, because we already know that too many people are after that quick fix, but I'm noticing there's a change now. Like it's coming, it's happening, and hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years it will just get better and better. But it's interesting to see how so many people have this perception of they have to lose weight yesterday, but they're not willing to actually take a minimum of 12 weeks to actually be educated and do the process really well to actually maintain the weight off, instead of going to F45 and, losing the weight so quickly and gaining it
I'm
back.
being mean about F45. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's just the standard thing that clients come to me with. Like, my leanest body was when I was at F45 and I did challenge and I didn't eat anything and I had like 8
Yeah, and
cups of
that's
green
why
tea
you're
a day.
lean.
And I'm like, I get it. Yeah, but you don't want to live like that for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you would be doing it now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All I was going to say, darling, was as well, if people want to research a bit more about flexible dieting, because I found this a very helpful resource, and I'm all for just like people finding more education. There's 2 incredible books that I would recommend, or audio books, depending on what your jam is. One of them is called Flexible Dieting by Alan Aragon. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And it's science-based, reality-tested method for achieving your optimal physique through flexible dieting, right? Which is, some of it's dry, some of it's very, very useful, really helpful tips for people who want to head into the kind of taste of flexible dieting, or flexible eating, as I like to call it, because you can use it at every phase of where you are. And then the other book that I recommend specifically for women is by a lady called Dr. Stacey Sims. She's incredible. You've heard of her. Awesome.
Yes.
She has a book called Raw, and it's a lot of it is aimed at athletes, but it's women who are fit, basically, who train and look after themselves and are into health and wellness. And she has written a book specifically for women, which is really cool, about training and dieting and all the impacts of both, right? So highly recommend that book as well. I think that's it. I feel like I've hopefully given you guys a lot of tips and stuff around that.
You have a lot, and I feel a lot of the listeners are going to go back to re-listen to this and really put things into practice. There's been so many valuable ways for women to start looking at their lifestyle around nutrition. And you know what? There's probably a lot of women listening to this right now having a little bit of a aha moment or a light bulb moment, going, oh, okay, I need to make some changes here if I'm wanting to, live sustainably for forever.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway I would say to everyone is, like, check in with where your mental health is at and your relationship with food, because that is the epicenter of it all, right? So if you don't have a good relationship with food and you embark on a diet, you're probably not going to come off better on the other side. Yeah. So, like, trying to get a beautiful relationship with food, whichever system that is, whether it's going to read books, whether it's hopping on the 80/20 program that I've got, whether it's just learning a new flexible way of eating for themselves, whether it's going to a psychologist, whatever that looks like, get your mind frame and your relationship with food sorted out, and the rest comes so much easier. Like, it's stunning to see.
I love that. Well, girls, I hope you all enjoyed today's podcast. I sure did. And I know I'm going to be going back to a few pointers for myself, just to reevaluate a few of the behaviors that I've been having around food. But anyway, before I continue blabbering on, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy, tag Sally at the Fit Foodie blog, tag myself, and let us know what you thought. We love hearing from you girls, and I'm sure Sally would love to hear from you all as well about what we spoke about today. And then if you loved it even more, please leave us a little sneaky review. That the more we hear from you guys, the more we can expand this worldwide. So thank you. And thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much. And if anyone does have specific questions, they want to just slide into my DMs, it's always open and I read every single one. So more than happy to answer any questions if anybody's got anything off the back of that.
Yeah, love that. Thank you, girls.